Hello again, everybody. This is James Bartley, and you're listening to the Cosmic Switchboard Show. Our very special guest today is Katie Wearne. Katie is a healing and recovery facilitator, shamanic, holographic, and Reiki transformation coach, psychic, writer, musician, intuitive tarot reader, and aspiring astrologer. Her 30 years plus of personal experience dealing with narcissistic abuse, mental illness, and toxic relationships have inspired her to help others claim their sovereignty and liberate themselves from pain, suffering, and stagnation, just as she did. Katie has dedicated her life to walking in the narrow path, the evolution of consciousness, and raising the base, this is key, the base frequency of humanity to partaking in the great work. So without any further ado, Katie Wearne, welcome to the Cosmic Switchboard Show.
Thank you, James. It's great to be here. It's great to finally connect.
Definitely. And we got a lot to talk about. And one of the reasons, and many, that I've asked you to come on and share with us is your galactic higher dimensional heritage and your extended ET higher dimensional, indeed elemental family. What I want the listeners and viewers to understand is limitations is just like this manipulation foisted upon our minds, through all these means of processed food and mind-controlled, manipulated media. We're made to feel like we're less than ourselves, right? But, and we're not talking of coming from any kind of an elitist perspective. Where we are coming from is the perspective of we are the sum of all of our parts. And those of us who know that it's more than just a global conspiracy, monetized debt system, depopulation, et cetera, sure, that's a part of it, but it's not the whole shebang. There's a lot more to it. And some of us have come here with an understanding that, you know what, this is where the action is. This is where we can make the most big time contribution to help humanity get over this current hurdle. So I would like you, Katie, to tell us a bit about yourself, your childhood, your upbringing, and, your journey of this self-discovery, the milepost and guidestones along the way that brought you to this point where you are able to, work with people and help them to understand that you have so much potential within you, and that it's literally interdimensional, it's literally cosmic. We just have to be able to tap into that part of ourselves and just let it go. So without any further ado, please tell us a bit about yourself.
Thank you very much. Yes, I absolutely with you on all of that. I guess you could say it definitely did start in childhood. I grew up, started off in Wollongong, Sydney, so full-on Legoland suburbia until I was about 3. And then we moved up to Byron Bay, to the hills west of Byron Bay in Mullumbimby, up into the thick subtropical rainforest. And it felt like before then that I hadn't even experienced life yet. It was like a whole new world to me, being surrounded by nature. And from the moment I hopped out of the car and walked out towards the house, everything started, what I felt, started communicating with me. It was like everything was transmitting data and energy that you could tap into, and that sort of started things off. But even before then, before we moved to the forest, I felt like I knew this place. I felt like I knew cars and I knew the road and I knew where I was going to go. And I used to take my little brother, who's a year younger than me, and we used to go off on adventures. If or someone wasn't supervising us, we were off. So a few times the police had brought brought us back to my dad and things like that. And that sort of continued on even as we moved up into Byron, especially because I wanted to explore this whole new world that had opened up to me. And essentially that's when I started connecting with all the different energies around me and started sensing that there were other things at play that we can't see, but they're there and we can feel them. And I could feel them so intensely, as well as it ended up being like a communal kind of space where Mum would invite some friends over and they'd end up moving in with us and building a yurt in the backyard. And we had this tribe. We started having this tribe naturally come together. And I feel that the adults at the time were actually really expanding consciousness. They were really open. Many of them were sannyasins, so they had that kind of philosophical and mystical background as well.
What are sannyasins?
So they're, I guess you could say, they're followers of Osho, although he, as far as I can tell, that's not necessarily what he wanted. He always told them, no, come and sit with me, learn what you can, and then take it away and go and spread that out. And even take it beyond what I have, and that's what I kind of got from that whole scene, and kind of got into his work when I was about 13. So yes, at the time it was a very hippie kind of feeling. My dad was a professional guitarist, so he would just play the occasional rock and roll gig on the weekend, and so it was very kind of hippie sort of situation. And I feel that the conversations, much like the ones we're having now, were taking place then within this little community that we had going. And I noticed that when parties were actually going on, that there were lights low flying over the top of the forest in the middle of nowhere. There's no houses, there was no electricity. We had no electricity either. It was just a generator. So it was very, very off-grid. And during these parties, these amazing parties that would go for days, I noticed orange and red lights flying low over the top of the parties. And at one point, at one of these parties, I actually saw people being beamed up into ships. And it's hard to describe, but these sort of things would shock your everyday person. They would be like, oh my God, it's something you never forget, which I haven't forgotten it. But because there were so many of these situations with aliens and other beings, angels as well, like angelic type beings, it was just one of many things basically for me that happened. And so there wasn't really any trauma around it. It didn't frighten me. It was like I knew why they were there. I knew that the activities that were going on with the adults were attracting them, and that these beings were interested in what was happening and monitoring people during this. I just knew that. I somehow knew. It didn't scare me. I had no fear like I do now. There's no fear of the unknown, basically. There was, a fearless kid. So that was probably the first experience I've had of actual physical beings actually, and ships, actually seeing them. I remember telling my mum about it as well, which also sparked some interesting conversations for everybody, I feel. During one of these parties that were going on, I actually had a near-death experience. And this is where earth angels come into it for me. Basically, I feel that certain beings incarnate here to serve as protectors for other beings, for other people that come here in human form, that they're placed strategically to be at a certain place at a certain time to make sure that someone's protected during a situation. So the person that actually made it a near-death experience instead of gone from this world, I now consider to be definitely an earth angel and like a guardian for me at the time, because if they hadn't been there, I wouldn't be here now. And I've also had these experiences going along with other people where they've come into my life and seriously, it has felt angelic, like just the energy of them as well. There's a particular energy to them. And so, yes, one of these nights I had stopped breathing, and one of my mum's friends decided to check on us, and I had gone blue. And during that experience, I actually remember what happened after. And I was going towards, this is very common, but going towards a white light. However, it did not feel natural to me. It felt like a beam and pulling you in. And for some reason, when you see this light, you don't feel to look around you. It's like it really draws you in. Like there's nowhere else to go but here. But for me personally, it just did not feel natural. It didn't. But I was still going towards it. And whilst this was happening, a very large, I don't know how large it would have been because I was little, so everything's big to me back then. But a large, tall, dark, cloaked figure, couldn't see the face, had like a black cloak, like a proper cloak, so I couldn't see her face, holding some sort of weapon or staff or scythe, or I wasn't really focused on that. It was just this giant figure stood in front of me and stopped me from going towards that. And it just stood there. There was no talking, and I was just looking up at it like this. At that point, someone had discovered that I wasn't breathing, and they came in and they tried to wake me up. When I came back into my body, I was surrounded by my mum and all her friends, and they were telling me to breathe, and I couldn't breathe. I was like struggling to breathe, like obviously I hadn't been breathing for a little bit of time there. And yeah, they thought that I had choked on something. So the guy who initially found me actually grabbed me by my ankles, turned me upside down and started shaking me like this, thinking that there's something lodged in my throat. To this day, I feel like if he hadn't done that it wouldn't have brought me back into my body. I still felt like I wasn't entirely in my body when I couldn't breathe. So I feel like the shaking actually drew me back in with all these people around going, breathe, Katie, breathe, breathe. And so that was, yeah, another experience that I had around that time. I also had to really think about whether I had changed after that point. you know, how there can be walk-ins and things like that, and your soul, there's
About how
soul
old were you?
fragments.
About how old were you when this NDE occurred?
I was 4 going on 5. Yeah. So later on during my inner work, I wanted to make sure that my soul was intact and that I hadn't left a piece of me back there. And I certainly went on a journey to ensure that. And it's possible that happened, but I feel like the processes that I went through to heal myself after years and years of narcissistic abuse, that, yeah, I've collected and completely brought back in any pieces that may have been flying around out there, especially from childhood. I sort of went way back to make sure. It's all about wholeness and sovereignty, you know, so I wanted to be sure that I was all here and this was all me and what's not. So and I came to the conclusion that no, I was actually the same before that. I mean, things changed after that, obviously, because I felt like I was more opened up to the unseen realms and the spirit realm after that. That is definitely a change that I'd call it an enhancement rather than a major change, because I still felt quite connected and aware of things before this event. So yeah, that's one of the things. Another thing that happened in my childhood, where I was interacting with another being of some kind there. I'm not sure, a guardian of some kind. Or
Yeah,
that's
a key moment. I'd like to talk to you more about that later. The individual who held you upside down and shook you and brought you back in, who was he? I mean, you don't have to go into too much detail about his exact identity, but and what became of him? Like, did you cross paths with him later on, or did you know much about his background?
He was a friend of my mum's who had a partner and a little son together. He was also a sannyasin. I don't know a lot about his personal life personally. The last time I saw him was, again, at a party when I was 13, a sannyas party. And he had spent a lot of time in India, but after that he passed away of cancer of some kind. So I don't know a lot of personal details with him, about him.
Well, somewhere along the way, he became friendly with your mom or your dad. So definitely at some level, your parents were predisposed to this, to even want to go to a place such as you described. Now, this is a shot in the dark. Is this anywhere near the Glasshouse Mountains or anywhere in that direction, or is that further north in New South Wales?
Yeah, further north, but this is very, very close to Mount Warning, to
yeah, so that's had flood issues lately because of these incessant rain attacks. But Mount Warning is sacred ground, big time.
Yes, it is. There's a very powerful portal there. Portal Stargate. It attracts a lot of people to it. But not many people can handle the energy being really close to it. And as far as I know, it is a sacred men's place, Aboriginal men's mountain. And women don't have very good times living anywhere near this this mountain. It is very sacred. It is very powerful. It has drawn all kinds to it. It opens and closes at times. You can actually feel the energy of it. It also has magic to the area where it keeps people trapped in cycles of habits and things, it more entrenched into it if you're closer to it, if that makes sense. It makes it harder for you to give up things like addictions, things like that. It'll really basically amplify what's going on for you and make it kind of more difficult if you're not aware of the energy of the place. It really has that, and it really has that impact on people, I've noticed, in the area compared to living in other places. I've really noticed some
kind of almost a
like
hedonistic, if it feels good, do it kind of thing, and
yes,
and not worry about the consequences.
yeah. And I think even though it is, you know, one of the most beautiful areas to live in, Byron, and all of that, I really feel like the pull to this area has a lot to do with that mountain. It's a very alluring kind of energy, but then once you get in there, and if you're surrounded by any, you know, if you're not doing the inner work, shadow work, or anything like that, or you're not consciously aware, this thing will keep you in a loop, much like
That's the danger of places such as that, and I've seen this many times in places like Sedona and elsewhere, where individual decides, okay, I'm going to go there and kind of bathe in the vortex energies in Sedona, and there are several, you know, well-known vortex sites there. But
yeah,
and I don't say this in any kind of an elitist sense, but if they haven't done the self-work, if there's any kind of baggage that any kind of entity or force can hook into, and then they go there and they meditate and do other things, it may not, you know, turn out too well for them. I mean, you know, they may come back with issues and attachments. It's interesting that you're telling me this, because the one time I was in striking range, what was I up in the Byron area for? Anyway, I was with friends and we were going up that mountain to visit Mount Warning, because, you know, there were certain things that we wanted to investigate and stuff. And something had happened in the recent past where the emergency services, SES, they blocked the road off. So we could only go up so far. We had to turn around, right? So the one time I was there, for whatever strange reason, they had, you know, denied entry to people. So it's interesting that all of this would happen around there. And it's also at that region that you described, seeing people like floated up in the ships. Yeah, that's...
Yes, it's all connected, this forest, which is the, you know, has really made me sure about these kinds of things. I've made these observations over a really long time. There's a lot of spiritual people here, lots of plant medicine ceremonies taking place all over all over this area, really. And you know what? The majority of people that have partaken in these ceremonies that I know of, they're not doing okay. In one way or another, they're not okay. I don't see the benefits at all. And if anything, I really see negative attachments of all kinds being involved in these, attached to these people after these ceremonies. So
well, even in places like Brazil and elsewhere in South America, when people latch on to what they think is an authentic shaman, a plant medicine shaman, for all they know, because if they may be coming from it, say from a naive new age perspective, that plant medicine shaman they hook up with down there, they could be a host for one or more entities. That, you know, the place where they will be doing the ceremonies and the partaking of the plant medicine could be a big vortex setter. You know what I mean? So this is why, if someone is going to do that, any kind of plant medicine ceremony, they need to be around someone they can trust, and someone who's advanced enough. They could go into your mindscape, even under plant medicine, right? and pull you
Yeah.
out, or at least guide you out. Too often, people go to these plant medicine ceremony shaman types, and these people are shysters and worse. They're entity infested. The place they're doing these ceremonies is a big negative vortex portal. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. Too much
Yeah,
of
so
too much of that goes
yeah,
on.
it does. And I thank you for sharing that bit at the end there. What I've noticed is that the land gets affected. The spot where they do these ceremonies is desecrated in a sense. And literally someone needs to go there and close up all the portals. But people are going to go back there and do it again. So it's like that spot is attuned like an open portal for things to pass through. The other thing is many of the shamans, where I've had clients share with me, I would say to them after they've shared their experiences, that sounds like a spiritual narcissist to me, not a shaman. So that's where it goes into dark shamanism, pseudo shamanism, and black magic even, of course, so.
Well, whenever there's ego activation in someone who would like to take on the mantle as being a leader type in any field, right? When the ego is activated, that's an open invitation and a happy hunting ground for entities. And so
yes,
activated ego, entities working through the activated ego, projecting out, it cause all kinds of mayhem and mischief, right?
Yes.
Now, what was going on as a young girl growing into adolescence, going into teenage years, from the dream world perspective, from the mystical perspective? What were your dreams like? What were the perceptions? Because you mentioned that after this NDE, your abilities, your psi abilities seem to have been enhanced. Could you take us through that process, the before and after, if you will?
I felt like I was already quite sensitive and aware, as I was saying before that. Afterwards, it felt like I could really distinguish between the different energies that were around at the time, whether that was beings of the forest or beings actually attached to people that were around, adults. My dreams, it's a funny thing, but I actually don't remember my dreams. Hardly any at all. The ones that I have remembered aren't. They're usually human scenarios where I'm working out problems or conflicts or things like that. I suppose there's been just bits and pieces that I'll remember of dreams. I've been a big dreamer while you're awake type of person. Been astral traveling whilst awake and ethereal traveling whilst awake for my whole life, I'd say. And I've just recently been learning the difference between the astral body and the ethereal body. And there is a difference, but what I'm seeing with people is that these two are actually fused together until you actually get to know each of these layers of yourself and use them consciously. It's like they begin to have substance, literally, with the ethereal traveling, my ethereal body now. It's almost physical. It is so almost physical. I can feel things just about in the ethereal. It's whereas the astral is more wispy. It's thin. It's not really feeling, and it's more of a visual pineal experience, whereas the ethereal actually feel things like you would in your physical body.
Yeah, I'm
so
glad
that's
you made
gone.
I'm glad you made that distinction. Just to interject for a second, and please hold that thought, because intellectually I get lazy sometimes, and I use shorthand. Left wing, right wing. You use certain terms that are generally familiar to people, and
Yeah.
unfortunately, I've used astral in that term because
Mm.
describing things as astral travel or an astral experience really shrinks the definition and the potential of what the experience could be. Because to me,
Yeah.
astral always describe kind of a dark, murky place, like you described. It's will o' the wisp. Sometimes there's some
Yes.
degree of physicality and density, but really, even when you wind up at a quote unquote place, I think what's happening is in your astral state, you've got just enough energy to almost, I wouldn't say merge with, but at least be able to perceive and be a part of momentarily a more ethereal, more more real plane, if you will. Nothing, not so lower, not so dark, not so undefined. And so when you
Yeah.
talk about the ethereal vice the astral, yes, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yes. Yes. So I feel from the work that I've done on myself that these two layers of your body, the astral and ethereal, actually quite fused together. They're very until you can't become aware that they are separate layers. And I even feel that these layers get thicker. Your field expands doing the inner work and awakening and becoming conscious and approaching everything from a spiritual perspective as well, which for me is feeling connected to everything, not disconnected. You have a connection with everything, the desk here, the tree outside, your body, acknowledging all the different aspects that make up the self and aligning them. Each of those things I have a spiritual connection with. There's no separation there. That is what spirituality is about for me, is being interconnected with everything. And so I'm not sure if I answered your question about dreams and things in regards
You
to my
did, because what you just described, this shamanistic sensibility where you can tune into the environment. And I've read social studies of Native American shaman and the like, and Aboriginal elders and the like, and it's exactly the same process you just described, where it's not a process of thinking or even tuning in. It's just joining with an already existing.
Yes.
Because when one can see at a very simple level, if one can see auric fields, for example, and like, oh, the trees are connected to the minerals, connected to the soil, connected to me. The trick is to be able to kind of filter out, the extraneous data, but still
Yes.
see the essential core, the essential kernel of the connection that you
Yes.
have with everything else. And that's what strikes me as how this matrix works to disconnect us from that. I mean, from so many different directions, even the food that most people partake in, processed toxins, disguised as food and whatnot,
Yeah.
and just lowering us and
Yeah.
making us denser and denser and denser, right? Fluoridated water, et cetera, et cetera. And the key is to remember, where we came from and who we are, and our quantum entanglement connection to that. Now, in the time we got left in this first segment, I'd like you to share with our audience some of the ET type experiences you've had, because you told me a lot there when you said that you don't really remember your dreams, because that tells me that from a conscious perspective, you're able to slip into theta or whatever brainwave state just naturally. I can't relate to that because I can't do that yet. But, from your perspective, what's it like in the day-to-day world, even, where you can see entities that people can't see, and you're in like a pharmacy or something, or whatever the case may be. And the fact that that you have this higher dimensional, galactic extended family, if you will, and then how the latter interact with you to help you keep grounded. And okay, you're here for lack of a better term, a mission. So please.
That's what I was going to say when we were talking about spirituality there, the way you were defining it is that if you don't just have focus on the core of that, then you just float away. You absolutely float away. There's no, because it's spiritual energy. So really difficult to, ground. You just float away. There's no anchor. It's like someone who's taken a little too much acid and they didn't come back from the last trip, if you know what I mean. So that's what happens, I feel, and that sort of verges into the New Age situation, the New Age movement, and their idea of living. So I'm not going to lie, it's quite challenging seeing pretty much most people having attachments of some kind and being disembodied. They're not connected to their body. They're not here in that case. It's very much about being up here. This is their experience. But what they don't know is with that, it's all the lower three chakras, basically. Pleasure-based things mainly. So it's taken a lot of getting used to, and when I actually brought consciousness to this happening, when I had the awakening that this is real and that I wasn't just, because I've experienced quite a lot of mocking and gaslighting and things like that made me sort of question myself later on. I was sure when I was younger, but getting deeper into a toxic relationship with a narcissist kind of, and even with family and friends who, obviously aren't on my level, but it's difficult. It was difficult. And it has been challenging since bringing consciousness to it and fully embodying, yep, this is actually what's going on here. I guess you could say I'm quite used to it now. It's just like, okay, that person, like I can tell if someone's methamphetamine, for example, I can tell if someone's a lot of people can, some people can't, especially, not whatever you want to call them, normal people or people who are still sleeping. I can tell. And it's not just how they look, but it's the attachments that they have. Their energy is very, very dark. And I know that particular drug spirit really well. The demon, that's a demonic one, okay? The devil's flute. It's
quite discordant. It's a quite discordant vibe.
Yes. So I actually can tell when someone's taking antidepressants, antipsychotics. I can actually see the neurological damage that has done to the person, how it's not permanently destroyed neurons essentially and pathways in the brain that will actually keep you in this head experience rather than being in your body and aware of your body, because that's the whole idea of them, is to numb you so you can't feel, because you, for whatever reason, you can't handle the emotions, thoughts, feelings, circumstances that you're in. So taking this pill numbs that all down a bit. I actually see that in people when they've taken them long term. Different attachments for different drugs and
That's
alcohol.
what I was just going to ask you. Does it seem to you that certain states of being induced, whether it's by drugs, alcohol, um, addictions, whatever the case may be. Does the latter seem to bring in certain attached entities, particular attached entities for particular issues? And if that's the case, what do they look like, and what differences or commonalities have you observed?
Okay, so demons, actual demons, and sometimes they can even be, well, let's just talk demons specifically. Let's go things like what are actually shown in the movies sometimes, like in The Exorcist, there's a face that pops up in the kitchen on the wall. It's very brief, it's all white, has red eyes. You only see it that once, I think, in the whole movie, just that once on the kitchen wall. Very much like that, very much like claws, black, slimy, large veins, and you will get that creepy feeling, not the icky feeling that you feel from Dracos or reptilians, but you will actually get that a creepy kind of feeling. And if you're you haven't faced your fear of death, if you still have fear there of any kind, that's what they like. That's what they feed off. They like fear. Some of the other ones, especially I've noticed with alcohol, is they like sexual energy. So they feed off that. I've noticed there's all these different emotions and all these different beings that have particular tastes. I see the ones in regards to alcohol as being more astral and wispy than actual physical features. I think with all of them too, they actually do attract, multiple. Fear can attract several different ones. Most of them like that. Most of them like fear, but others really do enjoy distorting sexual energy, which is where pedophilia and things like that come into it. Definitely, obviously, negative reptilians involved in that. From what I've noticed, they do have scales. What is it? The eyes, they don't blink, but this bottom part flicks up and back.
Yeah, it's a transparent membrane.
Yes, that's it. So there's ones like that. There are actually disincarnate spirits as well that attach to people. I've seen them as with the masquerades of light, where they look all and angelic and all white light around them. Through that is this nasty, I've seen old, what you could say, like an old witch with warts and messed up teeth and just really gnarly behind that lovely false white light, which is actually very similar to the light that I saw in my NDE. So I know the difference between false light and proper light. Do you know what I mean? The beautiful Mother Earth, milky white light that has like pearlescent rainbows off it. It's more milky. It's not that harsh blue white light, if that makes sense. Like
Yeah, so like in our field, and you're probably familiar with this, there's certain types of blue illumination that you want to avoid, if at all possible, and not get caught up in a blue light field, because it means a lot of different things. It could mean like sudden temporal time shifts, and weird kind of things happen, with certain types of blue light. Now, you were mentioning that you could see almost, I don't want to, put words in your mouth, for example, but the way you described the people's brains in neurology, excuse me, and it seemed as if you were able to notice when these discarnate entities have an impact on the brain function. are you able to see like what parts of the neurology like light up, or they manipulate or get into? And then if that's the case, if you can, have you noticed them able to manipulate the behavior or the speech or the
Yes.
yeah, please.
Yes, to all of the above. There's a lot of pineal, and there's a lot of occipital and the sides here. I know that there's plenty of entry points, but the temple seems to be a really main sensitive area for an entry, basically. I can tell, yes. Someone, a friend of mine has this issue like we're talking about. It's been medicated with tranquilizers and antidepressants. Literally takes tranquilizers to, he stays up during the day. He sleeps all day and he stays up all night, and he's fully tranquilized during the day. I feel like he's a really sensitive old soul like you and I. Okay. But he has suffered a major brain injury when he was younger, but there was no epilepsy or voices or schizophrenia until much later into his teen years, where he tried a specific type of marijuana. A specific strain actually triggered a schizophrenic episode with him. And from that point, he was hearing voices of all kinds after that. There is no flow in the energy centers of his body below his neck. It is, you could say, dead. There's just nothing there. All the activity is up here in his head, and very, pineal related experiences, which I actually connect to why he hears the voices that he does, because of the overactivity in his head, and because he is naturally gifted. He is sensitive. He's a sensitive. So yeah, he's definitely got some mediumship skills where he's hearing into the unseen realms, into the astral realm, and picking everything up.
He's clairaudient, and he hasn't developed the auric shields
Yes.
and ability to screen that out. And also,
No.
you mentioned that he's on some kind of psychotropic antipsychotics or something. See, that's going to open up even more. That it's the oxymoronic inverse nature of this matrix, where the meds to supposedly keep you from hearing voices like make you worse.
Yes. Yeah, no, the relief that he gets is when he's completely knocked out by tranquilizers. Otherwise, it's just constant. He's also battling in those other realms all the time. He sending out nets of light, like so he's constantly battling, which also to me indicates an inner conflict, the unresolved trauma, the inner critics from people around you. That is all still in there, and all part.
There was some unhealed trauma or vulnerability from this or previous incarnations that allowed them to get hooks into them. And
yes,
and
beautiful man.
And the way you talked about it, and the time we have left in this first segment, because it's key to understanding this cosmic chessboard of life, where I feel that the archontic forces know, or usually know, when someone like us is going to incarnate into the earthly plane. And if I didn't know any better, I feel that they set it up so, like pieces on a chessboard, they arrange at critical junctures in one's life, be it through the family, extended family, acquaintances, whatever the case may be. These archontically controlled individuals, many of them extreme narcissistic reptilian traits. And you mentioned that this narcissistic abuse and manipulation had tried at some point, for a certain period of time, to exert control over you. and then you had to, fight past that and then heal and recover. So in the time that we've got in this first segment, could you share with the audience what was going on with you at that point in time before you met this individual, whoever he/it may be, and then the seduction, if you will, in a metaphorical sense, of how, given your state of being, frame of mind, whatever the case may be, how it came to be that you became involved with this individual, and eventually what the steps you needed to take to break out of that.
Sure. So funnily enough, my life was amazing at the time. My whole family was doing really well at the time. We lived in a 9-bedroom, 5-bathroom house on the top of a beautiful hill where you could see Byron from there at the beach. And if you looked behind you, you could see Mount Warning and all the hills leading up to there. We'd just moved into this house. I was partying and a teenager. So my uncle as well at the time had just moved into a $1 million mansion in Byron Bay, even, closer, and was having also the time of his life. We were all having, I also co-wrote a script that year called The Oracle. It didn't actually get produced, but we got as far as getting, I don't know if you know Jack Johnson, but he was a part, he's an Aussie actor, and he did the narration for the trailer. So we got it going, and, there was talk of Heath Ledger being brought on board, so things were actually really amazing at the time. And, so throughout, like you said, they seem to know when we're born here. So throughout my life, once I came to this realization through some works that I'd read, I was able to go through my life and see where I had been targeted for all sorts of things. It's a long story, but I'll keep it back to what we were talking about. I was keen to get out on my own, so this relationship seemed, I'd also, let's just say I'd been with boys my own age, and they weren't doing it for me. I was quite mature, even, being an old soul, quite mature all the way along, but they weren't doing it for me, essentially. And I wanted something more fulfilling, you could say. I was ready for something more mature, or at least I thought I was. Little tiny bit naive there. And so obviously he was quite physically attractive as well. So that definitely helped draw me in. But the funny thing about this is that I actually pursued him. It wasn't the other way around. So in a sense, I feel this was meant to happen, and sure, another timeline, would have occurred, but I pursued this relationship. So I definitely can't say that I was, hunted or anything like that. But so throughout that whole process or whole relationship, which went on for around 17 years and 4 children, I slowly slipped under a veil of my own unconsciousness, my own unconscious, my own hormones, not being aware of my body, not really being in my body properly yet. There was a lot of escapism and disassociation through the relationship. So the recovery aspect was the biggest part of it was actually landing in my body for what felt like the first time in a long time. If you know, it really felt like, wow, I'm here in this present reality. There's no addictions. There's no, there's no drugs or alcohol or anything like that. It wasn't, apart from tobacco, there wasn't any of those kind of escapisms or anything like that. It was just video games and things like that, where because I just really wasn't happy. I didn't know what a happy relationship was either, though, because I hadn't had that displayed to me as a child with either of my parents. It was very, you can say, dysfunctional, basically, and very similar to my relationship. So that was normal to me, the dynamic in the relationship that I had. It was my normal, because that's how I was what I was kind of raised with. Including the psychological and emotional abuse that was very not obvious, so very, very covert. I had experienced that on and off throughout my life. So yeah, it took a lot.
A lot of it was like passive aggressive type stuff.
Yes, and turning things around on me, mocking me for being who I am,
mirroring, and just not validating your existence, basically.
Yes, a lot of that throughout the whole process, and eventually, without doing shadow work through that, or the inner work, or knowing about that, what I had was a new age type of approach, basically, or your everyday person type of approach. So there wasn't a lot of self-awareness. There was a lot of not wanting to be in this situation anymore. There was a lot of that. So it took me a long time to realize why, and become aware of my behavior as well, that it wasn't healthy, that it was toxic, and that even though I was in that relationship, I still needed to take responsibility for that in the end, for me, for what I allowed. And later on, it was when I actually studied a counselling diploma, that was when I started to see, hey, all of this has been happening to me. What's going on here? Emotional abuse, psychological, I didn't realize that was emotional abuse, or, that was psychological abuse. And so it wasn't until I actually studied psychology that I started becoming aware that this behavior is actually not okay. It is abuse. And that's when I started suspecting that those who treated me that way, including in my relationship, that were around me, they might not be okay. They might not be well if they're treating me like this. And then you go deeper into that, and it's like, well, if that's what's been around, what you've been around and what you've been raised with, then you must have some of those programs running in yourself as well. And that was another really, quite a rude awakening, as we I'm very uncomfortable, but it's so necessary for my own sovereignty and healing, to realize this and go, okay, hey, that isn't even mine. I got that from you. I went through this process of like, okay, that's come from you, so that can go. Pulled that out of my body. Yeah, was hyper aware of that.
That's one of the problems. The enmeshment takes place where, your sensibilities, your philosophies, your ideologies, your beliefs, and your sense of self-worth become enmeshed with the other person's, and then your sense of values, everything gets turned upside down.
Yes,
essentially.
constant
And
devaluing. And you become like them then.
yes, yes,
If you don't have, if you have that emotional enmeshment and you don't have good boundaries, you don't even know what they are, which I didn't.
and you
I
talked
had no
earlier,
idea.
and this is a key point, the uh, sensation of being disembodied, essentially, and being more or less permanently in one's headspace. Because when one is not
Yes.
grounded, embodied, and what do the New Agers always talk about? Raising your vibrations, but they don't talk about the importance of staying rooted, connected,
Centered, grounded, knowing
grounded,
who you are, a sense of
because
self as
a sense
well.
of self.
Yeah.
Because when we're in our headspace, that's a happy hunting ground for these discarnate entities of all stripes, which you've described, or at least some of the types you've described. Jerry Marzinski has been
Yes.
on the show a few times. Talks at length about all these marauding entities that are, beyond the visual spectrum, but they're there nonetheless. With all these intrusive thoughts and which affect our behaviors and what have you.
It
And
did.
then
Yes,
yeah,
it
what
does.
happens sometimes, and I've heard similar stories from other gals in our field, and the commonality seems to be that there is some kind of void that the gal in our example is trying to have filled, and she sees in the individual. It could be uh, just strictly the guy's physical appearance, his presumed manliness, whatever the case may be, and the potential of being a father and that whole aspect of it. And then what happens is they become enmeshed, and the person, and coming from the perspective of, in our example, of a gal who's pursuing the guy too, because I've heard this on a number of occasions, pursuing the guy, and then the guy goes along with it. It's all very choreographed at some level. It was
Yes.
orchestrated for at that point in time for that vulnerability to be there, to be exploited,
Yep.
essentially, and it's a two-way
Yep.
thing, because in the examples I've heard, these gals actively pursued, the man in question.
Yep.
There are some good serendipity. Sometimes wonderful children develop, out of the process, and that whole sense of having family. But on the other hand,
Yep.
the person going through this, they give up so much of themselves in the process until a point comes when they have to draw a line. And the time we got left, a few minutes we got left, where was your line? Where was your red line in the sand where you decided to, like, kind of pull yourself in and say, okay, I got to make some serious changes here?
I was plagued with negative thought intrusions and suicidal ideation. I was very, very overweight. I was very, very unhappy. It was a huge, massive low that didn't seem to end, that it just went on for quite a long time. And it was the counseling diploma, actually studying a bit of psychology and actually seeing that this behavior is not okay, and is classed as abuse, which I didn't know. Domestic violence, yeah. But I honestly wasn't aware that it was abuse. This is just how people around me talked to each other, treated each other, my closest. So, and I was isolated for pretty much the whole time that we had children. So I had no close friends. It was mainly just me, him, the kids, and family members occasionally. So I didn't have anything good to compare it with, I guess you could say, that told me this wasn't okay behavior. It was
There's not a
hitting the
handy
lowest.
guidebook or a PDF you could refer to,
No, I mean, you see these happy families in movies and stuff, but you go, well, that's a movie, and that's part of it too. I was like, okay, this is not a fairy tale. Okay, there's your fairy tales, you know, in the stories and the movies. There's your happy ending. This is not a fairy tale. Okay, there was just one kind of awakening after another at some point there, especially around studying the psychology of things. And I'd had enough of being in that energy and feeling weighed down by the weight of everything, plus being aware of what's going on in the world on top of that, okay, was just like something needed to give, and the external wasn't going to be the giver of it, what I you know, really needed and was seeking out. I realized that I was very, very empathic, and that I was taking on the energies, the mindsets, the deepest, darkest parts of these people's psyches that were around me, living with me for years. We had all been living together. And that was not me. That's not who I am. That's not who I want to be. Break out, break through. This is enough. So I identified that I was taking on other people's energies, and I realized that I'd been doing this for years and years and years, and this inspired me to take a really good look at those around me, because everything had been turned around on me as if I was the problem. But then I started looking, you know, of course, you got to take responsibility for you. But if you're also surrounded by people who don't want to be on the planet, are pessimistic about the future, I think the world's going to end, and every single, like I was caught up in the doom on scenarios for a long time. Oh, Yellowstone's going to go off. Pole shift's going to happen. A meteorite's going to blow us all away in September. Okay, these things I actually got caught up in because it was somebody else's paranoia. And the threat was there. It was there. Yellowstone was moving, okay, and hadn't moved in a long time. We had that massive earthquake in Japan. And it was like, okay, we might be, there was like this pole shift, lots of talk about pole shift at that time in 2010, leading up to this. And I still feel today that the amount of energy, and, you know, there was groups coming out with it, the Zetas were like, it's going to happen. Travel to this triangle in a certain part of Australia and you'll be safe. Or come and buy tickets in these caves over here and you'll be safe. But all these different groups and people were actually, in the truther community, were actually talking about a shift at that time. And I honestly feel that the amount of energy that everybody gave it had a lot to do with Fukushima. I really do. I also heard and know that their tech may have been involved there. And I have watched a lot of footage of that, like a lot of footage, because I was concerned about the radiation, as you would be. In the waves moving towards Fukushima were dark energies that looked like and ocean beings that looked like they were pushing this way, the wave towards Japan. I actually saw them in the water. So I'm getting a little bit off track there, but I was actually trapped in these doom on scenarios. And eventually I was just like, okay, I've survived. Now all of these, 2012 included, there is some bullshit going on here with all of this kind of stuff. Do you know what I mean? Like, enough is enough. No more. I'm getting out of there. And that was actually a program that my partner had running.
Well, we're just getting started here. We've come to the end of a first segment with our guest, Katie Wearne, and talking about her life. And please let us know what your website is.
So oceansofawareness.com.au. And basically what I'm offering there is to help people. I basically identify where the pain, suffering, or blockage may be that's preventing them from going to that next level. And help them identify and then provide the tools and support to do the mental, emotional, spiritual work around it. And if I pick up anything like ethereal implants, because I can actually see into the body, and that has a lot to do with analysing the data that is shared with me during the sessions, to actually see how they've come to be where they are, because I know how I've come to be where I am and have studied myself layer by layer to be able to do this and offer this as a service for people.
To our dear listeners out there, if you like what we do, if you believe in what we do, please go to the CosmicSwitchboard.com, sign up and become a member, and we'll see you at the top of the next segment. Bye for now.